And how I film my videos, tutorial part 1, soft sticks. Okay, so I get a lot of questions about what camera I use and just my general filming setup. So in this video, I'm gonna be telling you how I film my videos from talking heads like this to fingerboard edits. This video is just going to be about the setup, and then in the next video, I'm gonna talk about editing. I do want to point out that even though I'm a filmmaker, I don't claim to know everything when it comes to filming, especially not when it comes to edits. But I do hope that this video is helpful to you anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. To start off, I thought I'd answer the question I get the most, and that is, what camera do I use? I use a Sony a7R II mounted with a 24-70 f2.8 lens. I got this camera back in 2015, and there are definitely newer versions of this camera, or just newer cameras in general, but it works for me, so I haven't updated it since. Now, I'm very aware that not everyone can afford to invest in a camera, or not everyone wants to invest in a camera. So next week, I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to film using an iPhone, or any phone camera for that matter. At this point, I just want to stress that it's not about the camera or the gear that you use so much as it is about working with what you have and making the most out of it. You can achieve a really nice look with any camera pretty much. You just need to know, what works with your resources. Let's go ahead and talk about camera settings. I always shoot manual mode for everything aside from autofocus. I want to be able to control every single thing. So that includes exposure and white balance. For most cameras, you don't want to go anything above 1600 ISO because otherwise your footage is going to start looking grainy. You can figure out what works best with your camera by either looking online or just messing with the settings yourself. With ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, it's pretty much just all a balancing act because it's all about exposure. You want to make sure that you light your subject properly as well as just expose your subject properly. So you'll likely end up adjusting your settings multiple times and adjusting the setup in general multiple times to see what works for you. Your camera settings will also depend on the frame rate, or frames per second, which is what dictates whether or not you can film in slow motion. If you want to slow any clips down, you need to film in 50 frames per second or higher. I usually film talking heads like this in 24 frames per second and edits at 120 frames per second in case I need to slow anything down. The higher the frame rate though, the more light you will need. Lighting is actually the most important thing when it comes to filming, and you'll see once we get onto the rest of the video. You could have the best camera in the world and the worst lighting, and your film will look crap. If you've ever wondered how films can look as cinematic as they can, it's really just all about the lighting. It's also like a bunch of other elements, but a lot of it is lighting. You can control the colors, tone, how harsh or how soft you want the light to be. There's also a whole lot more, but we won't get into it in this video. In terms of lighting for talking heads, I experimented back in May to see what would work. I had those fingerboard collection videos which were lit absolutely horribly in my opinion, but now I have this particular setup and I love it and I'm gonna stick to it. So for these videos, I have multiple light sources. The first one is a keylight, which is a Godox light. I actually wanted an aperture light, but they didn't sell them in the store that I went to. And there's a softbox over it just to, like the name says, soften the light so it's not harsh. For backlight or hair light, the first thing is actually my computer right here. Oh, then I have an LED, which I can control with this. I actually have two remotes, so one for my key light and one for one of the LEDs. And this first LED is what creates this turquoise tint. Then I have two smaller LEDs, which I can't control with the remote, but they are what creates that orange tint right here. I'm gonna be linking everything that I have set up here or alternatives in the description below, so you can go check that out. Previously, I was using these two desk lamps that I got from IKEA, but then I decided I wanted to add a bit more flavor to my videos, which is why I just used these LEDs that I had. I'm really lucky to have a wall which is white and it acts like a natural bounce. My lighting setup definitely would not be the same if my wall wasn't white. If it was black, it'd be a whole different thing. These hair lights are completely optional. They're not needed, but I think they just create a more personal vibe, and also it helps separate you from the background a bit more. I just want to point out that I didn't get all of this stuff just for YouTube. I use it for my job, and it just so happens that it works well for my YouTube too. If you can't buy any new lighting equipment, honestly, just look around your house and see what works. Get any lamp you can and just mess around, experiment a little bit. One very good light source is actually natural light. So if you have a window that you can sit either in front of or next to, that can honestly be your only light and it'll still look really good. Sitting in front of the window will make the lighting more balanced, whereas sitting next to it will create a little bit of contrast. Just make sure you don't film during sunset because I've made that mistake before and it looks horrible. I always film at 35mm focal length, 24 frames per second like I said, 50 shutter speed, 2.8 aperture for that extra bokeh, and my ISO varies, but it's usually 800 because this light is very, very bright. I also always film on a flat color profile that is also totally optional, but it just gives me a little more control in post to edit the colors. I white balance by putting a piece of paper in front of my camera and adjust the settings accordingly. One extra tip that I have is sitting in front of a space that can create a bit more depth. So like where I'm sitting is right in front of my desk and there's a bunch of different objects and it looks like it's sort of randomly put around, but I promise you it isn't. For me, I like to keep the frame busy but not distracting. Now let's get on to fingerboard edits. Like I said at the top of this video, I am by no means an expert on this. I think my skill set is definitely geared more towards narrative filmmaking or interview style videos kind of like this. So I myself am still learning. I'm going to be talking specifically about a desk setup and not a full park because one, I don't own a full park, and two, I think most people also don't own full parks, so I thought this video would be a little more accessible. I don't even have like a specific fingerboard table that most people do. I just always light a singular obstacle. Okay, so my lighting setup for the desk is so simple. All I use is my two IKEA desk lamps, which I'll link in the description. I don't remember the names of them. What I love about these lights is I can move them in any direction I want, and that makes lighting so easy. I always try to film my edits at night just so everything in the background is dark apart from the desk and the obstacle. And since I'm filming at 120 frames per second, I always have the lights pretty far down without them being in frame though, obviously. Camera settings are usually 250 shutter speed, 1600 to 3200 ISO, and rather than prioritizing a blurry background or bokeh, I try to prioritize focus instead, and so I have it at f4.5. I know my ISO is relatively high given that I just said earlier not to go above 1600, but thankfully Sony makes cameras that have really good light sensitivity and I can go pretty high in terms of ISO without it looking grainy. Aside from my DSLR edits, I also have a mini DV camera, which is a TRV 900. I bought it off eBay a few months ago before I came back to Hong Kong when I was still back in Boston. When it comes to buying old cameras off eBay, something to really think about is the fact that they don't always work when you get them. This is actually the second TRV that I bought because the last one just absolutely didn't work. Even with the one I have now, there are a few things that are wrong with it. For example, if I'm trying to film and edit, I have to capture via my laptop because I can't capture playback. It always pauses or stops because of skipped frames, which just really sucks because I can't film and edit outdoors or anything like that. I have to do it at my desk all the time. But shortly after coming back to Hong Kong, I also found that we had this HD handy cam at home. So I've been using that more recently just because it's easier, but nothing beats the mini DV look. The fisheye for the Handycam is a Pixco 43mm fisheye. I tried to look for Upteka, but apparently they don't sell that in Hong Kong. I don't know the brand of the fisheye for the TRV. It's just some shitty brand. Honestly, I really have no idea what it is. The lighting setup I use is pretty much the same. I might adjust it slightly where I bounce it off the wall rather than directly onto the obstacle, but that also depends on the camera setting or what I'm trying to light in itself. I think it's really important to film multiple angles, especially if you're like me and don't film with a fisheye. I obviously have the two fisheyes for the Sony Mini DV and the Handycam, but I don't have one for my mirrorless. Obviously, different people have different preferences, so it's just important to remember to find your own style and do what works for you and what you think looks good. There are a lot of people who stick to just the one angle fisheye look, which I think looks really nice for a lot of people's styles. I also sometimes do that for small Instagram edits. One thing that I don't do is the follow cam style filming. It's just too hard to do it on my mirrorless because it's so heavy, but I could do it on my smaller cameras. I'm still working on it, which is why I haven't posted anything. But I promise you that when I am satisfied with the way I film it, I'll be posting clips with the follow cam style filming. My friend Jared, also known as Stezzy Fingers, also known as Sponsor Me Tape, actually did a video on how he films his edits for Instagram, and he uses his phone. If you haven't already checked out the video, definitely go and do that because I think it's really helpful and useful. If there's anything that I recommend investing in, it's definitely some good lighting equipment, whether it's small LEDs or bigger lights. But I definitely recommend trying to work with what you have first before going ahead and buying anything. One thing I think everyone should keep in mind is to film for the edit and not think that you can fix everything in post. You want to make the job of editing your video as simple and as easy as possible. There are also a lot of things that you can't fix in post, and there's only so much you can do with what you have. So I definitely recommend that when you're shooting, everything is at least 90% of where you want it to be. That being said, I'm going to be showing you how I edit my videos this Friday. I'm going to be going through how I edit everything as well, so talking heads and edits. And like I said, in the future, I'm going to be teaching you how to film using a phone, an iPhone if you're like me, or any other phone. That's it for today's video. I hope it was helpful. If you enjoyed it, remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any other questions, you can definitely ask them down below in the comments. I'll make sure to answer them as efficiently as possible. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram as well at annieannfb.mov. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.